Crooken Sands. Mr. Arthur Fernley Markham, who took what was known as the Red House above the mains of Crooken, was a London merchant, and being essentially a Cockney, thought it necessary, when he went for the summer holidays to Scotland, to provide an entire rig-out as a Highland chieftain, as manifested in chromolithographs and on the music hall stage. He had once seen in the Empire the great prince, the bounder king, bring down the house by appearing as the McSlogan of that ilk, and singing the celebrated Scotch song, "There's nothing like a haggis to mak a mon dry." And he had ever since preserved in his mind a faithful image of the picturesque and warlike appearance which he presented. Indeed, if the true inwardness of Mr. Markham's mind on the subject of his selection of Aberdeenshire as a summer resort were known, it would be found that in the foreground of the holiday locality which his fancy painted stalked the many-hued figure of the McSlogan of that ilk. However, be this as it may, a very kind fortune, certainly so far as external beauty was concerned, led him to the choice of Crooken Bay. It is a lovely spot, between Aberdeen and Peterhead, just under the rock-bound headland whence the long, dangerous reefs known as the Spurs run out into the North Sea. Between this and the mains of Crooken, a village sheltered by the northern cliffs, lies the deep bay, backed with a multitude of bent-grown dunes where the rabbits are to be found in thousands. Thus, at either end of the bay is a rocky promontory, and when the dawn or the sunset falls on the rocks of red syenite, the effect is very lovely. The bay itself is floored with level sand, and the tide runs far out, leaving a smooth waste of hard sand on which are dotted here and there the stake nets and bag nets of the salmon fishers. At one end of the bay there is a little group or cluster of rocks, whose heads are raised something above high water, except when in rough weather the waves come over them green. At low tide they are exposed down to sand level, and here is perhaps the only little bit of dangerous sand on this part of the eastern coast. Between the rocks, which are apart about some 50 feet, is a small quicksand, which, like the Goodwins, is dangerous only with the incoming tide. It extends outwards till it is lost in the sea, and inwards till it fades away in the hard sand of the upper beach. On the slope of the hill which rises beyond the dunes, midway between the Spurs and the point of Crooken, is the Red House. It rises from the midst of a clump of fir trees, which protect it on 3 sides, leaving the whole seafront open. A trim, old-fashioned garden stretches down to the roadway, on crossing which a grassy path, which can be used for light vehicles, threads away to the shore, winding amongst the sandhills. When the Markham family arrived at the Red House, after their 36 hours of pitching on the Aberdeen steamer Ban Rich from Blackwall, with the subsequent train to Yellon and drive of 12 miles, they all agreed that they had never seen a more delightful spot. The general satisfaction was more marked, as at that very time none of the family were, for several reasons, inclined to find favourable anything or any place over the Scottish border. Though the family was a large one, the prosperity of the business allowed them all sorts of personal luxuries, amongst which was a wide latitude in the way of dress. The frequency of the Markham girls' new frocks was a source of envy to their bosom friends and of joy to themselves. Arthur Fernley Markham had not taken his family into his confidence regarding his new costume. He was not quite certain that he should be free from ridicule, or at least from sarcasm, and as he was sensitive on the subject, he thought it better to be actually in the suitable environment before he allowed the full splendour to burst upon them. He had taken some pains to ensure the completeness of the Highland costume. For the purpose, he had paid many visits to the Scotch all-wool tartan clothing mart, which had been lately established in Copthall Court by the Messrs. MacCallum Moore and Roderick MacDoo. He had anxious consultations with the head of the firm, MacCallum, as he called himself, resenting any such additions as Mr. or Esquire. The known stock of buckles, buttons, straps, brooches and ornaments of all kinds were examined in critical detail, and at last an eagle's feather of sufficiently magnificent proportions was discovered, and the equipment was complete. It was only when he saw the finished costume, with the vivid hues of the tartan seemingly modified into comparative sobriety by the multitude of silver fittings, the cairngorm brooches, the philibeg, dirk and sporran, that he was fully and absolutely satisfied with his choice. At first, he had thought of the Royal Stuart dress tartan, but abandoned it on the MacCallum pointing out that if he should happen to be in the neighbourhood of Balmoral, it might lead to complications. The MacCallum, who, by the way, spoke with a remarkable Cockney accent, suggested other plaids in turn. But now that the other question of accuracy had been raised, Mr. Markham foresaw difficulties if he should by chance find himself in the locality of the clan whose colours he had usurped.